There's this moment that sticks in my head from the very first testimony in the Energy Transfer versus Greenpeace trial. Energy Transfer's project manager for North Dakota, that tall, bald man named Mike Futch, is on the stand. And he's been speaking authoritatively about exactly how the pipeline was built and everything the company did to avoid damaging any culturally important sites. I can see why Energy Transfer put him on first. He's got this military vibe that, as a Midwesterner myself, I know that a lot of Midwesterners tend to trust. Energy Transfer's lawyer starts asking about one day of construction in particular, September 3rd, 2016. That's when Energy Transfer began to expand the pipeline at a specific site known as the Cannonball Ranch. The lawyer asks Mike this key question. How do you respond to the allegation that there was desecration of burial grounds, sir? That didn't happen, and it's a personal insult, he tells the court. It's a powerful statement coming from this guy.
He's a coward, and he hides behind a shield that he wants to keep him and his little cronies protected.
That's Cody Hall, the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe member who was originally named in Energy Transfer's lawsuit. And he was there at the Cannonball Ranch that day in 2016 as bulldozers tore through what tribal members had identified as a burial ground.
They got sneaky and moved their bulldozers and came to that site and desecrated it.
One of Energy Transfer's main accusations against Greenpeace is defamation. Among other things, they say Greenpeace lied by saying that the pipeline company intentionally desecrated Oceti-Sakowin sacred sites. But that claim doesn't originate with Greenpeace. It originates with Indigenous leaders. And that's who we're going to hear from today. This season of Drilled, we bring you Slapped, the story of an Indigenous nation fighting for its water, an environmental nonprofit facing extinction, and an energy giant using the courts to punish protesters. It was the end of August 2016, and Cody Hall had been at the anti-pipeline camps on the edge of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota for a couple weeks now. Up the road from camp, in this area marked to be bulldozed, a survey was underway. A respected elder from the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe was looking for sacred sites.
People at camp kind of, mistook him and his crew for ETP.
ETP meaning Energy Transfer Partners.
They were like, we got to go after these people. They're on the, and it was like, after we found out it was Tim and his crew and stuff, it was like, no. He's on our side.
Tim Mentz was the guy leading the crew, which told Cody this was important.
Oh, I knew of Tim for, ever since I was just a young, teenager. And I knew his role. He is well respected for his knowledge of pretty much everything from the stars down. When Tim talks about stuff, it is something that you pay attention to because it's of an importance to our livelihood and our existence that we keep on these certain ways of life. He was like our genius in our cultural ways.
Tim Mentz is in his 70s. When his grandma was a kid, it was illegal to practice Indigenous religions. As he grew up, that started to change. Still, he's faced a lot of hurdles in protecting Oceti-Sakowin sacred sites, which is part of the reason that he didn't want to talk to me on the record. Instead, I spoke to Valerie Gressing, the executive director of the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. What is a sacred site?
In real speak, I guess, it's anything a tribe says it is. It's a place that they identify as sacred for whatever reason.
Indigenous religions are often based on specific places and lands. It's why the government criminalized Indigenous spiritual practices as they colonized what became the United States of America. In the 1990s, Tim fought for a change to the National Historic Preservation Act that gave tribes more of a say in what places get protected from destruction. It created the role of Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, which over 200 tribes now have. They especially weigh in on projects built on federal land. In fact, Tim was the first Tribal Historic Preservation Officer in the United States. It was a big deal, but it wasn't enough, because Indigenous nations still don't have veto power over government-approved construction projects.
They can still make whatever decision they want if they deem it to be in the national interest.
Outside of federal land, tribal historic preservation officers have even less of a say in what happens to sacred sites. And they're sometimes pitted against state historic preservation officers, who are typically archaeologists and have a lot of decision-making power. The archaeologists often don't recognize the things Indigenous people consider sacred.
There's not any strong protection for place anywhere.
In July 2016, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe filed suit against the federal government, against the Army Corps, and that suit really revolved around protecting sacred sites. The sites Tim was looking for are stones arranged in circles and other shapes, used for ceremonies and other purposes. They wanted the agency to do a deeper review of the entire Dakota Access Pipeline route, and they wanted construction stopped in the meantime, including on private land. Tim submitted a statement to the court describing what was at stake. Destruction of these sites will eventually destroy generations of family connections to these areas of spiritual power. He wrote, "These sites still retain the ability to mend our people." The pipeline company replied that they'd already surveyed the route for culturally important sites and avoided most of them. They said the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe had had opportunities to weigh in on the route, and now it was too late. As this was all happening, a rancher named Dave Meyer was in touch with the tribe. He owned the land where the pipeline route met the Missouri River, the Cannonball Ranch.
That was our buffalo ranch is what we were using it for. It was a really beautiful ranch. It's pretty much all grassland, with trees and draws going down to the Missouri River. So very nice place.
Dave says he had a good relationship with the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe.
We rent a lot of land from them. We own land on the reservation. Basically, we got along really well.
Dave generally supported the construction of the pipeline, but he also didn't see any problem with letting Tim inspect the land.
I did invite Tim Mentz right away, and there were some other guys with him, and we drove around through different spots and looked and stopped on hills, and he was showing us some different rocks and stuff, because I figured if the pipeline's going through there, everybody's going to have to walk through and give their opinion.
On a hot, bright day, Tim traveled about 3/4 of a mile from Dave's buffalo fence on the side of Highway 1806 to a mowed strip of land that extended into the distance. It was the pipeline easement, the area where Energy Transfer had permission to bulldoze. They began to record what they saw. Tim and his team sketched 82 stone features, including 27 burial sites along 2 miles of the corridor. It didn't surprise Tim too much that so many were there. It was near where the Cannonball River flows into the Missouri, and it had long been an important gathering place.
It was very heartwarming. That kind of anteed up the our position of more of a, what we need to protect.
Cody Hall spoke to Tim as all this was unfolding. Then, Friday morning before Labor Day, Tim wrote up what he'd found. His biggest find was a cluster of stones arranged in the shape of the Big Dipper, with a gravesite attached to the cup from an important leader. This is one of the most significant archaeological finds in North Dakota in many years, he wrote. His declaration was filed as part of the tribe's lawsuit against the Army Corps. The lawyers entered the coordinates of the sites into the public record. I know what happened next because of Cody. I put in a public records request for his arrest report just to fact-check details he told me about getting stopped by police. But that report had a whole lot more in it than I expected. It happened to include interviews with security personnel and construction workers who were at the Cannonball Ranch that week. The police interviews show that abruptly, just after the tribe's lawyers filed Tim's statement about the sacred sites, a private security firm working for Energy Transfer reached out in the middle of the night to a security dog company called Frost Kennels. They wanted Frost to bring their dogs out to the pipeline route the next morning. Energy Transfer was expecting a protest, the report says. The company had made a change to their construction schedule, according to records described during the Greenpeace trial. Days earlier, Mike Futch had sent a construction schedule to police with the date they planned to start bulldozing in the area that Tim surveyed. Instead, the bulldozers showed up more than 5 days early. The morning after Tim shared the coordinates of the sacred sites, construction workers apparently moved those bulldozers around 15 miles ahead of their course, directly to the area of the sacred sites. For Cody, that day started out normal at the Oceti-Sakowin camp.
That morning was having some coffee and some breakfast, and it was like reflecting on what happened during the week, right? There was a group of women that came down from what was called the treaty camp area.
The treaty camp was sometimes called the frontline camp. It was much smaller than the other camps and located on a hill right on the pathway of the pipeline, positioned so campers could see what was happening along the route.
So these women drove down from that camp, speeding through, and said, some bulldozers are up by the treaty camp. We need everybody to come up. And I thought, bulldozers? What the hell, right? So I got in my vehicle and drove up there, raced up there, and here, sure enough, on the left side, there were bulldozers. I thought, holy crap, here they are. On a weekend, nonetheless, because we knew that they took the weekends off.
Cody knew that this was the same area where Tim had identified sacred sites just the day before.
I couldn't help but thinking, over and over in my head of these sneaky bastards. They are trying to rid of us, literally. And, no, gloves are off. It felt like being pushed. Well, what are you going to do now, Injun?
A group of people kicked down the barbed wire fence.
Children. The bulldozers are still going, and they're yelling at the men in hard hats. One man in hard hat threw one of the protesters down.
I remember looking down the road, right, on 1806, like towards camp, looking to the south. You saw vehicles full of people coming up, people jumping out, of all the vehicles and running to the west.
Cody followed the others toward the area where bulldozers were rolling.
We ran up on it, and that's when all these white pickup trucks, these guys jumped out, and they had their dogs. They had German Shepherds, and I thought, all right, they have dogs, and what do we have?
People began grabbing what they could use to fight back against the destruction of the sites.
So guys are grabbing those surveying sticks, and some guys are trying to loosen up the steel posts in the fence lines and stuff. Others grab, rocks.
The dogs were barking and growling.
One of our female water protectors was talking to that female officer, that female security person, and she let go of her dog, and it bit that water protector gal. It bit her left boob. That was the end. And I saw a few gentlemen, take those surveying sticks and stuff and just whip those security officers and the dogs to get them back.
The police report says that one security guard went to the ER, and 3 of the dogs were injured. 6 water protectors were bitten by dogs, according to a tribal spokesperson at the time. I asked Cody what he would say to the accusation that the water protectors were violent.
Any of your listeners listen to this, they would protect what they believe and what they love wholeheartedly. And if that meant that there was a consequence, then we'll take it. We're not just going to allow a bunch of bulldozers to come in, and meanwhile, we're supposed to stand on the other side of that barbed wire fence and just see that desecration and say, oh, well, we're going to wait for the legal system to protect us.
The bulldozers and security trucks backed down.
I remember there was people just throwing the dogs in the back of the pickup trucks and jumped in those trucks and literally just drove off.
When Tim visited the construction site to survey the damage from the bulldozers, he could see from the side of the road that a significant portion of the site we'd surveyed had been cleared, Tim wrote in another declaration to court. I do not believe that the timing of this construction was an accident or coincidence, he added.
People were crying. People were mentioning that there was sacred sites here. And I didn't want our people and our allies to go back to their vehicles feeling defeated.
Cody jumped onto the pile of dirt at the edge of the bulldozed easement and gave a speech as people recorded on their phones.
There's a reason why you all band up together here from all different tribes. Because your ancestors said, take one leap of action to defend, and that's what you guys did today.
Police watched it and arrested him later that week. This was the arrest he told me about in our first episode of Slapped. Police weren't the only ones seeing videos from Standing Rock. All over the rest of the country, people were watching the footage of water protectors being attacked by security dogs.
It backfired big time.
Suddenly, the movement exploded. Because
within 2 days, we saw the roads on 1806 jam-packed, getting into the camp. There was a huge amount of people showing up to stand up and stand with us.
Energy Transfer denied they'd done anything wrong that day. They even got Dave Meyer, the rancher, to sign a document saying he didn't invite Tim Mentz to survey his property for sacred sites. The state of North Dakota sent their own archaeologist out to investigate. Energy Transfer's private security team created an elaborate security plan involving on-call police snipers, who I guess were supposed to come to the rescue if someone tried to attack the archaeologists. They called it Operation Point Break. Yes, also the name of a 90s Keanu Reeves movie where he's an undercover FBI agent infiltrating a group of surfer/robbers. After it was over, the chief archaeologist of the North Dakota State Historic Preservation Office issued a statement. No cultural material was observed in the expected corridor, he wrote, adding, no human bone or other evidence of burials was recorded. He concluded that Energy Transfer had not broken North Dakota law. It was a big victory for Energy Transfer. The North Dakota archaeologists had just undercut Tim Mentz's expertise and the stance of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. The bulldozing continued, and so did the legal fight. And by then, Energy Transfer hired Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher to help them convince the judge to rule against the tribe. In the years that followed, the pipeline company doubled down on its questioning of what Tim Mentz knew. They filed their lawsuit against Greenpeace, which argued that repeating the tribe's assertion that Energy Transfer deliberately destroyed sacred sites amounted to defamation. Then, one day around early 2024, as the trial date loomed, Greenpeace showed up on the Standing Rock Reservation. They wanted to meet with the tribe to talk. It turns out, Energy Transfer had put a settlement on the table, a way for Greenpeace to get out of this trial. And Greenpeace was wondering what the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe would think if they accepted it. Because if Greenpeace did accept the settlement, they too would have to undermine the tribe's word on sacred sites. Tom Goldtooth is a citizen of the Navajo Nation and also has Dakota heritage. He runs an organization called Indigenous Environmental Network.
I've been the lead in our Indigenous Environmental Network since 1991.
Tom first got to know Greenpeace at a critical moment for the environmental movement.
We challenged the white organizations back in the early 1990s with environmental racism. They did not have Native people on their board of directors. They did not hire Native organizers. Many just came into our territories, to do a direct action, rappelling down an incinerator tower, things like that, but not taken into consideration of building respectful relationship with our people.
A new set of principles was being introduced, called the Jemez Principles. They were guidelines meant to make it possible for environmental organizers to be able to work together across cultures and across struggles. Two of the key principles: let people speak for themselves and work together in solidarity.
Greenpeace stepped up.
In 2016, Tom was one of the people who asked Greenpeace Inc. to come to Standing Rock to bring nonviolent direct action training and the solar trailer to the water protectors. And in 2024, Tom was again talking with Greenpeace as they approached their court date in the energy transfer lawsuit.
Our conversation with Greenpeace said, hey man, this is mucked up. Okay. And, we'll stand with you. You're going to fight this.
But for a little while, it stopped being so clear that Greenpeace was going to fight this. Greenpeace's leaders in the U.S. had gamed out what would happen if they did. Given the jury pool in Martin County, North Dakota, they estimated they only had a 5% chance of winning. If this went to trial, they determined that Greenpeace as they knew it might cease to exist. Energy Transfer's lawyers told them that if they simply settled, they would drop all this. They would let Greenpeace live. The organizations would just have to put out a little statement. The statement included a few key points.
I'll put it into moccasin telegraph word of mouth that I understand is that one of them was that they were telling Greenpeace, if we're willing to settle if you say that there was no destruction to any sacred sites.
The precise settlement language shifted and changed over time. However, there were three themes that Energy Transfer kept pushing. Greenpeace would have to indicate that there was violence within the Standing Rock movement. They'd have to say that the Dakota Access Pipeline did not pass through the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's land. And the thing that really rippled through Indian country, Energy Transfer wanted Greenpeace to declare that the pipeline company did not deliberately desecrate sacred sites. In other words, the corporation behind the Dakota Access Pipeline wanted the best-known environmental organization in the world to undercut assertions that the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe stands behind to this day.
This would violate that respect of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, that relationship, because they're continuing to hold the line.
But Greenpeace considered it. Over the next few months, Greenpeace's U.S. leaders gamed out the best and worst case scenarios for settlement and a trial. The worst case scenario for a trial was grim. A trial might mean the loss of a 50-year legacy and all of Greenpeace's future impact. It could cause reputational damage to the tribe, allies, and other activists who would be forced to testify. It could set a legal precedent for suing movements out of existence. A trial could put 135 staff members out of work and risk the whole global network of Greenpeace organizations. The best case trial scenario didn't offer much hope. If all went well, maybe they'd be able to say, "We went down fighting." Some concluded that any trial scenario would be catastrophic. On the other hand, the worst-case settlement scenario wasn't looking quite as bad to some. A settlement might cause a PR crisis. Greenpeace might lose a few $1 million a year in funding, and some staff might resign. Manageable. A settlement might mean Indigenous allies stop working with them. Manageable. And a settlement might mean Energy Transfer uses Greenpeace's statements against the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. To some at Greenpeace, this seemed manageable too. A settlement would mean Greenpeace would live to fight another day. This was the option supported by Greenpeace USA's executive director, Ebony Twilley Martin, and several senior Greenpeace managers. But multiple people high up in the organization strongly opposed Energy Transfer's settlement proposal. For example, Deepa Padmanabha resigned as Deputy General Counsel because she disagreed with senior management's position, according to sources close to Greenpeace. And some staff members got wind of the settlement and organized a letter to the board, urging them not to accept the terms.
There started to be a division of those that wanted to settle and those that said, no, we got to hold the line, you know?
Tom Goldtooth spoke to Greenpeace's then director, Ebony Twilley Martin, over the phone multiple times.
She was in a dilemma. The pressure was on. You know, the fear. Imagine anyone that has that is in a leadership position of a large organization that if they lose this case, they would have to close down their offices.
Right.
You know, and that was the depth of the debate. You know,
what would have happened if they had accepted that settlement and said those things?
I'm chuckling on this one. Oh, geez, I can see you quoting me.
I know you got something to say.
I would say this would end our relationship with you, with Greenpeace. It was that serious. This is a life and death issue to our Indigenous peoples. This is a life and death issue to life itself, to water, to the river.
What was her response to that?
Quietness. I feel it hit her hard.
Back on the Standing Rock Reservation, Janet Alkire, the chair of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, prepared for Greenpeace to accept the settlement.
We didn't know what they were going to do, so I had to basically not only prepare myself, but talking to the council and the team.
She didn't share all the details of what tribal leaders had discussed with the Greenpeace lawyers, but she recalls what she told the tribal council.
It doesn't matter if that decision is theirs, just like our decision is ours, and we'll be okay. It'll just make it harder, but we're still not going to stop fighting, you know.
Ultimately, it was up to Greenpeace's boards to decide. Nidia Alicia Garcia is an Indigenous Chicana organizer who sits on Greenpeace Inc.'s board.
It was clear for us that it was a hell no.
To Nidia, it was obvious that the survival of Greenpeace was not the most important thing on the line. But it made sense to her that certain people in the organization did want a settlement.
When you're an 8-figure legacy big green, you're going to have to hire people who know how to keep 501c3s viable and afloat. And at the same time, you're going to need to hire people who are fully aligned and ready to embody the mission in everything they say, think, and do. And that is the forever tension in nonprofits that exist to be in service to the movement.
It came time to vote on whether or not to take the settlement. And and the boards decided to reject it. It came at a cost, though, and I don't just mean losing the trial. Ebony Twilley Martin, Greenpeace's first Black woman executive director, left Greenpeace USA. But Deepa ultimately rejoined as senior legal advisor, and Niria stands by the choice that her board made.
I'm proud that we stuck to our values and decided to stay true to the spirit and the mission and the purpose of why Greenpeace ever came to exist anyway.
She connects what happened with Greenpeace to what institutions all across the U.S. are now facing.
Look at what we're seeing this happening right now. If they don't like you, if they don't like the language on your website, funders, the government, it can everything that's given to you top down can be taken from you top down. But at the end of the day, nonprofits are discardable. They are revocable. They are replaceable. And the movement is not. Relationships are not. And morals and values are not.
A year later, the trial is proceeding. We're in the courtroom in Mandan, North Dakota, back with Mike Futch, who's still being asked about the bulldozers and sacred sites on the Cannonball Ranch. He says the very day the tribe's lawyer filed Tim's declaration identifying sacred sites, he dispatched his construction manager and a security contractor to check it out. And they told him the sites were outside the pipeline's path, and the bulldozers would be able to avoid the ones on the edge. They decided they didn't even need to call in an archaeologist to visit the area and double check, and they certainly didn't call the tribe. Here's Energy Transfer's lawyer during a pretrial hearing.
There was just rocks and loose dirt. When Energy Transfer looked and investigated at those sites where they said there might be some culturally significant resources. And there was also no human bones or other evidence of burials was recovered in that area.
He shifts his focus.
Now then, what about the issue of deliberateness? There's no evidence of deliberateness.
The tribe's argument that Energy Transfer deliberately bulldozed sacred sites has to do with the timing of when bulldozers came to the Cannonball Ranch. They'd moved the bulldozers there sooner than originally planned, immediately after Tim Mentz identified the sacred sites. On the stand, Mike Futch says Energy Transfer had planned at least a week in advance to move the bulldozers out of order, because a big powwow was coming to town, and they wanted construction in the area to wrap up before new people showed up. Mike tells the court that he notified several law enforcement officers of the plan. Except that story seems to conflict with the schedule they sent police. And when the Morton County Sheriff takes the stand, he says he didn't know Energy Transfer was going to be in that area. And he adds that that was abnormal. He usually did know the company's construction plans. Another Energy Transfer executive takes the stand to argue that another pipeline had actually been built in the area way back in the early 80s. If there were any sacred sites there, they would have already been destroyed by that construction. But this is another one of those moments where unexpected information is laid bare. Through a public records request, I got a copy of a report written by a contract archaeology firm hired by Energy Transfer. They made this map where a strip of color shows the area that got dug up back in the 80s. And it shows Tim's sites outside of that zone. So what this executive is saying about the existence of sacred sites being impossible because of that old pipeline, it doesn't seem to be accurate. The pipeline company's stories about the sacred sites aren't totally adding up. Remember, Energy Transfer kept pointing to the archaeologists' reports to prove they hadn't destroyed anything. In fact, that contract archaeology report concluded that 4 of Tim's sites were in the Dakota Access Pipeline's right-of-way, and one of them was covered by dirt when they visited. Greenpeace calls to the stand Sebastian Braun. He reviewed those reports, as well as Tim Mentz's findings.
If I walk across a field in Pennsylvania, it's a field, I don't necessarily know that that was Gettysburg Battlefield, right? If I walk across the mall in Washington, D.C., and I see this weird obelisk tower there, right? I don't know that that's sacred ground. I just don't know. With anything cultural, I depend on the people from that culture to tell me what the things mean.
I spoke to Sebastian about his testimony, especially that report we mentioned earlier in the episode, where the North Dakota State archaeologist said he hadn't found anything.
Does that actually tell you whether or not there were burial sites or sacred sites there?
No. It does not say there were no sacred sites. It does not say there were no burial grounds there. It does not say anything really apart from we didn't find any human remains and we didn't find any evidence that any laws were broken.
He tells me what the reports say is simply that they didn't find anything archaeological.
We only find that things are archaeological if we can identify them as man-made. And as an anthropologist, okay, I have to say that is appalling. It is a narrow definition of significance and meaning.
Sebastian says that kind of logic doesn't even work where it comes to burial sites. In Indigenous Plains cultures, people were often laid to rest on scaffolds. So a burial site wouldn't even necessarily mean that bones could be found in the ground. The other archaeologists basically confirmed what Sebastian is saying about the limitations of archaeology in their own testimony, which was pre-recorded but never made it into the trial.
Both archaeologists are very honest, as you said, are very honest and open about actually not being able to identify, recognize significant sites, sacred sites, or to assign meaning to them. It doesn't at all say there were no sites. It just says we didn't find anything.
In other words, the archaeologists used by Energy Transfer to prove that sacred sites were not destroyed didn't actually have the expertise to know the answer, and indicated as much to the court.
Those are questions that should be left to the people who hold that place in significance.
Greenpeace International's executive director, Mads Christensen, is called to the stand. Energy Transfer's lawyer Trey Cox points to what seems to be the key piece of evidence in their case against Greenpeace International, which is a letter written by a different organization called BankTrack in November 2016. It's signed by over 500 other organizations, including Greenpeace International, on page 9. And the letter says that sacred sites were deliberately desecrated. Trey is interrogating Mads about the letter that Greenpeace didn't even write. He looks the lawyer in the eye. If you're aware of the fact of these sacred sites and still go ahead, then it must be deliberate. Greenpeace had made their choice. They stood behind the tribe. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe did not make an appearance in court. Janet, the tribal chair, explained to me that they don't mess with state courts as a rule.
We don't go to state courts. We go to federal courts because we are a sovereign nation. We are the original sovereigns of the United States. And we went into treaties with the United States government. So basically, we are elevated above the states.
She said she's grateful that Greenpeace decided to reject the settlement.
The demonstration of that strength and courage is a huge testament, and to show other organizations that you don't undermine your own integrity, to take the easy road of anything.
Ultimately, Energy Transfer's deal-making felt familiar to her.
We've always had to deal with the divide and conquer, and we do it amongst each other too. But I think that wasn't divide and conquer, so to say, of Standing Rock. It was the divide and conquer of this planet.
Actually, that Greenpeace settlement wasn't the first time that the pipeline company attempted to use deal-making to undermine the water protector movement. But the last time Energy Transfer tried to make a deal, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe was directly in the crosshairs. Drilled is an original Critical Frequency production. This season was reported and written by me, Aline Brown. Our senior editor is Audrey Quinn. Additional editing by Tristan Ottone at Grist. Our producer and sound designer is Ray Pang. Mixing and mastering by Martin Zaltz Ostwick and Peter Duff. Fact-checking by Shilpa Jindia. Our First Amendment attorney is James Wheaton of the First Amendment Project. We're also a member of Reporters Shield. Our impact producer is Lindsay Crowder, marketing by Maggie Taylor. Original artwork for this season was created by Victor Pasquale of Digital Navajo. Our theme music is by Dear Lady. The show was created and executive produced by Amy Westervelt. The Center for Media and Democracy supported document review for this season. You can find a companion feature story to this season at grist.org. For related stories and to support our work, check out drilled.media. To follow my work, check out my newsletter, Ecofiles, at alinebrown.ghost.io.
Know what you want, what you really want. Know what you want, what you really want. Know what you want, what you really want. Know what you want, what you really want.